Okay, class. Today what we're going to be building is a continuation of what we started talking about yesterday, which are areas inside of .NET MVC. We're going to set up our areas for, ultimately for permissions, right? You set up an area so that you can restrict that area based on users and their roles. So as we get into authentication and authorization, we're going to have these areas set up for those purposes. We're going to set up custom routing, and so built in the default routing. We've gotten used to that pattern by now, but we're going to actually set up some custom routing to enable paging and sorting. Of course, we're going to do the old material as well, where we're going to start from an empty project, bring in Tailwind, bring in Entity Framework, and here's essentially what we're building in kind of like the landing page for an end user. If you're just on localhost, you can kind of just view the cars, okay? And notice we've got paging and sorting kind of going on now as we click through, but we could, sort by make, model, and year, okay? But if I were to go to an admin area, now notice just by the URL that we are in a specific area that once we have users and permissions, we'll lock that down. You can't get there without an admin role. When you get here, we have the ability to, of course, edit a car, delete a car, add a new car. Okay, so we can do other operations as an administrator that you cannot do as a standard user. And that essentially encompasses all of these, basically what we're going to build. Areas, custom routing, entity framework, CRUD, and of course we're using Tailwind. So, recommendation here, I will make this a public repo. So for my class, you guys will have access to it. You'll have access to the source code. But obviously we want to understand how everything connects together and how it's all working together. So my recommendation is to kind of observe, right? So that as you need to piece it together on your labs, you need to kind of do this yourself. You have a template to kind of reference and kind of start from. So I will just start up a new Visual Studio Community 2026 and we'll get started. I do go fast as I can. So if you need to slow it down or just reference the source code, you can. Create a new project, as I like to start from the empty ASP.NET Core C# web empty. And I'm just going to call this is areas routing demo, right? Custom routing .NET areas. I'm going to put this outside of my repo. I'm just going to put it on my desktop. Okay, so areas and routing demo. I'll just call it areas and routing. How about that? Areas and routing on my desktop so that I can make it a public repo. .NET 10 HTTPS. Let's go. Okay, so to enable MVC, just kind of start from scratch. We're going to get rid of the app.mapGet, and to enable MVC, we do this line here. Enables MVC controllers and MVC views in what's called the services collection. So that essentially enables MVC. Once MVC is enabled, we need to kind of set up the structure, which is a folder structure, which is models, plural, views, plural, controllers, plural. Did not mean to click that. Add another folder. Okay. And inside of views, we have a shared subfolder, and we add a layout here, a shared layout file, a razor layout. This is kind of our shell of our application. And directly underneath views, for our views, we had two items. We had a view imports, it's called. And in here, you need to have a using statement for your model's namespace, but you can't do that unless you have that namespace created. So let me create like a car class. When I create the car class, this creates the namespace, areas, and routing models that I can then say using the models. And I also like tag helpers to add those attributes on my HTML tags that don't exist in pure HTML. So that's my view imports. We also need a view start that links the view start will link the views to the shell called layout. Okay. Now, since we will be using Entity Framework, we need to bring those packages in via NuGet. So I like to browse for my two Entity Framework, Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. So these two packages need to be installed. Version 10, .NET 10, version 10 of the package. So we install so that Entity Framework works with our local DB. And clear that out. Tools. Now if we were doing identity here, I would go ahead and install the two packages for identity, but that can come later, bringing in the actual user accounts. For my car model, I have a pretty simple model. Again, this is code first Entity Framework, so the ID will automatically become the primary key. And then we got some make, model, and year. Very simple. Again, this is called the domain model. It's a domain model because it will be used by the database to create our records in the database. So domain model is called car. Auto-implemented properties. We need to create a connection string inside of app settings. This is a lot of typing, a lot of typos to make. But here, a couple things to just point out. Again, this is us creating the connection string into our database. So I call my database local DBCS, local database connection string. This is also where you name the database itself. The database itself here is named CarsDB. And this is going under the instance of SQL Server called MS SQL Local DB. If you click on View Object Explorer and you installed .NET web applications on the installer, you should have this local DB, MS SQL Local DB. So that's the instance of SQL Server that our database will be saved under. You can kind of see here, I've already got a CarsDB. I'm just going to delete that because I'm creating it over from scratch. I don't need that CarsDB. So there's my connection string. However, I need to tell my application to use that connection string. And in order to do that, I also need to create what's called an application DB context. So there's a file called dbcontext that helps make the connection between your C# controllers and classes into the database. I'm going to do this a little bit different. So my class, you've seen me do this before. I'm going to add a new folder called data. Okay, and so I used to just put this in the models folder, but I'm going to put my SeedData in my ApplicationDbContext in its own folder called data, just to separate it out even more. Okay, models are domain models. That is different than a context file. So I'm going to create my context file under data, and I'm going to add a class called ApplicationDbContext. Now, it's important to realize if you're using identity, your parent is an identity DB context. But we're not using identity, but we don't have user accounts. So our parent is just DB context here. Okay, so meaning that this class needs to have inheritance, and we're going to inherit from DB context. So in order to inherit from DB context, I need to say using Microsoft Entity Framework Core, so that we can use this. It's not the default constructor. It's called the constructor. It's a newer syntax. Initialize. What's it called? Primary constructor. Primary constructor is what this is called. Ultimately, you take in this one variable into ApplicationDbContext, and you pass that up to the parent, and it looks like that. And our DbContext has one table. So all we're doing is we're setting up our database to have one table. The table will be cars plural. Makes sense to make it plural because the cars table will have multiple car records. Okay, but another thing that I'm doing a little bit differently here is I'm not putting my seed data inside of my context. Again, to kind of just separate things out, I'm gonna put a new file here. I'm gonna add a class, and this is seed data. I'm gonna seed my data a little bit differently. Here, so I'm gonna come back to this static class in a little bit to seed my data differently into my database. Right. So back in Program.cs, now that we've got a connection string, now that we've got the entity framework dependencies installed, and now that we've got an application DB context, we need to use dependency injection to inject the DB context into our controllers. And so there's a one-liner here. After controllers with views, we are going to add our application context. We're going to inject them into our controllers. And this application DB context, again, makes the connection to the database via the local DBCS connection string. Okay, so that's tying it together. That ties the C# model all the way into the table, into the connection string, into the database. You guys are familiar with the default route. So down here, it looks like this. The only difference is instead of the home controller by default, I say, hey, use a CarsController by default in the index method. Let's set up our static files. Add www-root. All of our static files, CSS, JavaScript, images go under here. And there's a one-liner called use static files that allows us to access the www root folder that we just created. And because we've installed Tailwind 100 times by now, we know that there is a CSS file in here. There's 2 of them. And I believe I call it site CSS. Yes, I do. I call it site CSS. And all I do on site CSS is I import Tailwind CSS. This is Tailwind version 4. You don't need a Tailwind config anymore. This is kind of a more modern approach to implementing Tailwind. So that's all good. Wait a minute, we got a few more steps for Tailwind. We just can't import Tailwind. So NuGet is for server-side dependencies, but there's also dev time dependencies. Tailwind is a dev time dependency. So we can go to the developer PowerShell, which is under Tools, Command Line Terminal, or Developer PowerShell, and npm init -y. Again, this is just a developer dependency that we're going to use Node to bring in Tailwind. TailwindCSS.com, docs, Tailwind CLI, the simplest and fastest way to get up and running using Tailwind from scratch. You can kind of see we need to run this command. We need to import Tailwind CSS. And then you have to compile or build your Tailwind CSS into an output file. So the next command I run is npm install Tailwind. I run that command. And instead of having to run this build process manually from the terminal every time, right? Instead of running this every time I make a change to Tailwind, instead, every time we do a build, I want it to do that compilation or that build process. So if you click on the project file, which is right here, there's a chunk of code right here that says, hey, we got a file inside of www.root, and when we build or when we prepare for publish at both times, go ahead and run that command. So anytime you build your project, take the input file, minimize it into an output file. And then what we do is inside of our layout, go into here, LINQ href equals tilde slash, so that's www.root css output.css, and rel is a style sheet. So this links to our output CSS. And to test, if you just do a build at this point, we should get an output CSS, I believe. First build, so it's taking a little bit of time. There's our output CSS. It's a good first step. Now I like to kind of get a different shell from Tailwind. If I go to, not templates, I believe components, documentation, application UI stacked layout. I like to kind of use this pretty basic stacked layout for our shell. This is version 4.1. And what I do is I replace everything in here with this, and I still need that render body right here. There's a couple of things to fix here. It says, hey, your HTML needs some classes on it. So if I replace that HTML tag with that, it says your body needs that. This line errors out, so I take that line out, uncomment out the script so that your navbar works, put a double @ symbol there, save. Okay, so now we've got a shell, but we don't have a view yet. We don't have a controller, but we do have a model. Let's go ahead and get the database created at this point. But I did mention that I'm going to do the SeedData a little bit different for our database. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a method that I can call static class static method. So you say class name dot method name, and the method signature is public static void initialize. So the class is named SeedData. The method is called initialize. We have one parameter here called service provider. Now we can read our DB context into a variable. I'm missing one curly. There we go. Okay, so read your context into a variable. This is another way of bringing in a context. And this is if the cars table has any records, just return the DB has already been seeded. Now, here I just make a big list of cars with 50 cars. You can use your SeedData of choice. Macaru is what I use to just populate 50 dummy cars. But I needed 50 dummy cars because I need paging and sorting. So I needed a bunch of dummy cars, not just 2 dummy cars. Okay, so I make a list of cars, 50 cars in that list, and then I add that should be cars. Rename cars, enter. I add the cars to the cars table, and I save context save changes. This is a little bit nicer, keeping your SeedData out of the DB context. Look how nice and clean our DB context is. Right? Now we just got a table called cars inside of our DB context, and now our SeedData is inside of a class, inside of a method called initialize. Now we just have to call this initialize method. So that's pretty simple. Let's go to our Program.cs. And underneath right here, we do an application build. So with this app variable, I'll say using, and we're going to talk about different scopes. var scope. Let's see if that's right. SeedData initialize. That's right. So here we read the service provider. Again, we're going to elaborate on this. We read the service provider and then pass that to our initialize method. So SeedData class initialize method. So we're calling it right here. And that's how we're just going to be able to seed our application data a little bit differently. All right, now I think I'm ready for a migration. let me just stop and think for a second because I'm going so fast. It's okay if it errors out. Let's just try and add a migration. Init initial create, or just call it init. You're initializing the database. Build succeeded. It created the migration file. Notice it creates the cars table, and it does not necessarily have the seed data in here anymore. Now I still don't have a controller in a view. So let's fix that, and let's spell controllers properly. Glad I caught that. Controllers. Let's add a controller. This time, and you've seen me do this before, I'm going to scaffold this out. Problem with scaffolding, really the main problem is that it still uses Bootstrap instead of Tailwind, but that's an easy fix with AI. AI is supercharged with Tailwind, right? So MVC controller with views using Entity Framework. The model is our car, our DB context. Is ApplicationDbContext, generate views, use the layout page. The controller is named CarsController. So this is going to bring in CRUD operations. The other problem with this is you have to understand the code that it writes for you. We have covered all of this in this class. We've covered this code in the controller. So I'm confident that if you guys all did chapter 4, which you have at this point, you pretty well understand what's going on with these different methods and this application context. It's just CRUD operations. Now if I were to boot this up for the first time, let's see what crashes. Of course, it's not going to look good because it's still trying to use Bootstrap instead of Tailwind. The build succeeded, that's good. Waiting for launch. Still going the first time. Okay, didn't like something. Program.cs. An error occurred connecting to CarsDB on the server. Oh, I didn't run my migration file. Let me close that down. That was still from the old one. I created the migration file, but I didn't run it. I have to do update database. Try again. That looks better. Okay. There's our seed data coming out of the database. It's got edit operations. Okay. This is because it's trying to use Bootstrap, and Bootstrap used a library called jQuery. It's got these partial scripts, and you just have to basically say the partial scripts are optional, and you have to do that in the layout file. And so here, back in the layout file, under views, shared layout, scroll to the bottom, throw in scripts, and the scripts, which is jQuery validation scripts, are not required. Cool. And if I click edit, that doesn't crash anymore. Details, delete. Now we're ready to get into some new stuff. None of that's new. So yesterday we learned about setting up routing, and we learned about adding other routing patterns, and we understand one use case is paging and sorting. So I'm going to add a paging and sorting route to enable that. App map controller route. Name paging and sorting. Cars page. Remember, there's a difference between what goes in the curlies, which can be dynamic, and what is just in the string, which is static. Now there's also something I didn't cover in the lecture yesterday, is that this paging and sorting route, when a front end if you just hit /cars, for example, of course if you give a full URL, of course it'll use this. But if they were to just, because keep in mind that this is a dynamic optional, and that's optional. So what this actually does is if you go /cars, that this pattern will leverage the index method of the CarsController. So both this route and this route can both use the index method of the CarsController. So we have to update that method to accept optional numbers and optional sort by, so that basically one method can handle both scenarios. So this is kind of cool how you'll see how it works. But basically this paging and sorting can use the same action method that the default route does. Basically these two routes use the same action method in the same cars class. So let's go to that cars class. This is really where the logic of the paging and the sorting takes place. Okay, right now, if I go to the index method, it doesn't do any paging and sorting. But that's where we're going. It's not a search bar, but links to do that. All right, so in my CarsController, in my index, I have to set it up with those variables. Again, the variables, we named them right here, are called num and sort by. So we're going to give them default values. The default page number is page 1, makes sense. And the default string sort by default will sort by make. So again, we have to implement the logic. If you've never seen, which I know you guys have seen, sorting and filtering logic, sorting and paging logic. So this will seem familiar. If you've seen it once, it's very familiar to what we've done before. Remember in C# and all these database interactions we have, we use LINQ, right? So what we do is we build a LINQ query, and we started off with this line here. So this is a LINQ query, and we're going to query the cars table. We write a little more LINQ, and we say, hey, to apply the sorting, this is actually pretty cool modern C# switch. Okay, the syntax for this switch is probably not the syntax you learned in your C# book. Okay, that C# book switch syntax is kind of old. Right, this is updated switch syntax where you can look at the sort by string and say, hey, if it's a year, then order by the car.year. If it's model, then order by the car's model. If it's make, order by car.make. If it's none of those, or if it's default, then order by the make. Okay, so kind of a modern switch in C#. So we have now accounted for the sort by. We now need to figure out, hey, what page? How do we account for the paging? Again, the theory here. How do we account for paging? First off, how many items are in the database? You guys know I seeded 50 cars. So we need to know, okay, there's 50 cars in there. How many pages do we need? Well, it depends on how many items per page. We need to set that up. So I set up the page size to 5. So you get to define how many items per page. We got 50 items and our page sizes are 5. So we need to read the total items, and then we need to do the math of dividing the total items divided by the page size and rounding up, right? We go to the ceiling because if there's 52, we need an 11th page. We don't do 10.5 pages, we do 11 pages. So we do a math.ceil, this divided by that, and that's our total number of pages. Just how we applied the sorting, now we have to apply the pages. We actually run the query, we skip page number 1 minus 1, 1 minus 1 is 0, times the page size, which is 5. 0 times 5 is 0. We skip 0 for page number 1. You don't want to skip anything for page number 1. That makes sense. And then you take 5 cars. So you don't skip any, and you take the first 5. So you skip 0, take 5, convert that into a list, and put that into your, take those 5 cars, put it into your cars variable. And then you return those cars to the view. Okay? Now you can imagine page 2. Page number 2, the math changes just slightly. 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 times 5 is 5. Skip 5 and take the next 5. Right? Shake your head if that's vaguely familiar. You've seen logic like that before with paging. Cool. You're shaking your head. I don't even care if you're lying to me right now. If not, you saw it for the first time, and that's cool too. Okay, now this index method takes a list of cars. Let's go back to our cars index and see that it takes a list of cars. It does. Okay, all right. Let's boot this up. This is still Bootstrap, by the way. Still ugly. But now it should at least give us 5 cars. Hey, cool. 5 cars. Let's fix our view though. Because here's the deal. Our view, our end users should not be able to edit or delete. It should only be admins that could edit or delete. And we actually want to make this look pretty. They should not be able to create, right? So we got to take some functionality out.
Like hide them?
Yeah, we're going to hide some things. So, right? So I'm going to change this index to cars. And I'm just going to delete. Okay. Here comes our view. Here's our cars. Again, we now need, on our view, we need controls for sorting and we need controls for paging. Okay, buttons. We need buttons. So we're going to allow users to sort by make, model, and year. Okay, so I'm going to put these inside of a div. Now I need to create a link that hits my new route. Right? So here's what a very standard link, anchor tag, href /cars /page1 sort by make. Same thing here. Cars page 1 sort by model. Cars page 1 sort by year. Again, it's always starting with page 1. Anytime you change the sort, you're starting back over with page 1. And all we're doing is we're passing in a different variable that will hit our route as defined in Program.cs. Where's our Program.cs? Program.cs. It'll hit this route. It'll pass page 1, and num goes to 1, and sort by goes to whatever statically coded word, make, model, or year. I'm going to build that up. Okay, kind of working, kind of not, because we're not displaying our cars yet, right? All we're showing you is make, model, and year. This is where it needed to get right now. It needed to change the URL, but we're not actually displaying any cars on the page yet. So we got our sort links, and they are in fact working. Okay, let's display the cars. Now the cars, this is a table. This is just a table styled with Tailwind classes. Notice inside of here, we're looping through each car inside of the model and putting a new table row for each car. Okay. We're getting somewhere.
This is for like an admin, right?
This particular, notice I don't have edit and delete and create. So an end user can view. So this is fine for an end user, they can view, but the admin will be able to create, edit, and delete. So notice I don't have create, edit, and delete on here.
Wouldn't it be easier to put it in an area?
That's what we're going to do for the admin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. If I change, this is the make is all Audi, so we're sorting by Audi by default. Change the model, it's sorting by the numeric before A. So that's working. Sorting by the year is also working. Okay. All right. The last bit of controls, right? We got our sort links. We've got our data. Is our paging. Now, paging's a little bit more complicated. I have to go back to CarsController. I missed one thing on my CarsController. We create some view bag variables to pass the current page to the view, to pass the total number of pages to the view, and to pass the sort by to the view as well. So these variables, these pieces of information, you want that accessible in the view for our paging controls, right? And we're storing that information inside a view bag. So now back here, this is a good chunk of code, but at a high level, we'll walk through it. All right, parent element is a navbar. This is a nav tag. This says page, current page, so it'll say page 1, page 2, page 3 of total pages, 1 of 10. So this will say page 1 of 10. If the current page is greater than 1, create a link. So let's just imagine current page is 2. Okay. Create a link that will say page two minus 1. So current page will be 2 minus 1. So it'll say page 1. Sort by, view bag, sort by. So this will say page 1. Why? Because this link, if we're on page 2, you need to go back to page 1. This is a backlink. That's why it says previous. Make sense? So that's the math. You're on page 2, you want a link that says page 1 to go back. If the current page is less than the total pages. So current page is 2. If 2 is less than total pages, which it is, then you need a next, right? 2 is less than 10, you need a next. Same kind of thing, you say page 2, go to page 3. Here's a link that says page 3. And also maintaining the sort by operation as well. So basically, you know, if you've got less pages, a less link, and a next and previous. Very simple controls there. But it took a little bit more logic to implement that. Cool. So now page 1 of 10. There's no previous button, but when I go here, now there's a previous button. 2, 3, 4. It's sorting by make by default. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 of 10. Now we just got a previous, next, previous. Sort by year. It resets back to page 1. Okay. Paging and sorting. For the end user, next up, admin area. Okay. Kind of a couple part process. Step 1, let's just make an areas folder. Right click, add folder, areas, and a subfolder called admin. And inside of here, we're going to add, we don't really need models, but we do need controllers. Remember, these are like mini MVC areas. So we need controllers and we need views. Now, in theory, I don't need all the CRUD operations. Like if this were real, I would delete everything that I'm not using here. Like all the CRUD operations, the only thing I'm using here is the index. I don't need anything else. okay? But I do need it for admin, right? So this controller, I'm going to copy this controller and paste it right here. So I have a CarsController. Now immediately, if you copy and paste the file, the namespace is no longer the same. This is areas and routing dot areas.admin.controllers. This is a new folder structure, so not only do you have to create the folder structure, you have to create the logical namespace. So that gets our controller to work the same way. And inside of views cars, I'm going to copy this and paste it here. How many times do I tell you not to repeat yourself? This breaks all of those rules. I'm just repeating so much code here. It's terrible. But again, I would delete the code in the other areas that I'm not using, so it's not just a duplicate. It's also the case that our views needs a view imports as well. So I'm going to add a new item. And a view start. Actually, this might not. But it does add the tag helpers, so that's why I did this. Add tag helpers. I still wanted my views to have tag helpers. That's why I did this. I didn't need this first line here. I just wanted the tag helpers. There's a little bit, I still have to link it up to the layout. So the view start, I think I just say start, razor view start. And here, what I do is I give it a relative path. So I say, hey, go to the root, views, shared, layout, CSHTML. So I want all my views in my admin area to use the same layout as the other. Okay, back here in our Program.cs, as we learned yesterday, app map area controller route. So this method call name admin, area name admin, all of that looks correct. So remember, there's really two things that have to work together. Number one, you need routing for your admin area, which is set up here. And number two, on your controller, go to the top of your controller, and you have to say, hey, area is admin. So the name here, name admin, has to match the name here. That links the routing when a browser request comes in to this area, it knows to go to this particular CarsController that's marked appropriately by its name. So that gets that area set up. Let's see what breaks. Again, the trick here is just to do /admin. And /admin lands that route. It looks the exact same because it is. Again, don't repeat yourself, and I am. So I'm going to change that. But notice if I just make something up, like that's not going to work. That's not going to work. Like it does have to match. And the URL. So what's happening here, /admin, we are not providing a controller. We're not providing an action or an ID. But it's hitting this. It's also worth pointing out, at this point, if I click on any of these links, it doesn't stay in the admin, so we have to fix that, because that was not coded properly for the admin area. Let's go now to the index view. And change that, because the main thing is we now need the buttons to edit and delete and so forth. So if I go to my views index, underneath my heading, first thing I'll do is I'll use some tag helpers, and I'll give an admin a link to create a new car that says create new. I will, in my table, add a fourth column. The fourth column will say actions. That's where we're going to have edit, delete, and view. And inside of my for each loop, I will add, for each car, I add 3 links. The area is admin, the controller is cars, the action is edit. Same thing, admin area, cars controller details, admin area, cars delete. So inside the table now we've got links to add, edit, and delete. And all that functionality was scaffolded in. So if I go /admin, we've got the ability to edit. I got to fix this Audi2. Audi2 has now been edited. Delete, delete. We have one less Audi. So admins now have the ability to create new. Jeep Cherokee 93, create. And you should be able to find Jeep Cherokee. Like Anna said, the next thing to do is to search, and that's we'll get to search, but okay. The next thing to do is to fix in the admin area. All of these links here need to keep us in the admin area. So if I kind of go up to these links here, I just refactor those links using tag helpers instead of using static links. We say, hey, the ASP route, admin paging and sorting. You could have done this differently. You could have just used ASP area admin, controller, but this very specifically passes page number 1 and sort by into those variables. So it could have been maybe done differently, but do you use the tag helpers or not? In this case, I've found it easier to use the tag helpers. They're not always a hard requirement, I guess is the point. /admin brings us here. Now notice it's actually still going to take us back. And here's why. we did not create, just how we had to create a paging and sorting for the regular users, we needed another one for admin. So there's actually one that goes on top of this that's paging and sorting for the map area. So I'm going to do another map area, and this is called admin paging and sorting, which matches admin paging and sorting. That's why that didn't work, because I didn't have that route actually created in Program.cs. And if I do /admin and I click make, now it keeps us in admin. And I have to reformulate these buttons to keep us in admin as well. So again, that's back in the index view. That's these links down here. And I just reformulate those with my tag helpers. There we go. Okay, /admin. That keeps us in admin, and now that keeps us in admin. I can perform CRUD operations. And so I'm going to use a little AI here, and I'm going to say format my admin views with Tailwind V4. Again, I have no hesitation on using a little AI to power through my front-end design. I get the heavy lifting done. Create, edit, delete. It's all it's doing is removing the Bootstrap classes and replacing them with Tailwind classes. By the way, if you ever think about it, you know, even the template here provided you with Bootstrap classes. So literally all we're doing is substituting out Bootstrap classes for Tailwind classes. So that's create. There's edit. Details. Last but not least, delete. And with minimal effort, you can at least get a good, basic styling. /admin. If I go to my details, I at least have some basic styling on the page. And last but not least, I am going to update my layout instead of just providing these dummy links. I'll say ASP area is empty, ASP controller, cars, ASP action, index. This will be home link. ASP area is admin, ASP controller, cars, ASP action, index. Okay. At least update my nav bar to have the 2 links that are actually used on this site. All right. And instead of using the word team, this needs to say admin area. I hope you guys found that useful. Learned something. A couple things. This will be helpful for your assignment. But now we got admin area. And we've got the home area. And that covers all those bases. I'll stop it here.